Yes, we are all back. We can start.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this ceremony. I hereby open this academic ceremony in which Lorena Giuberti Coutinho will defend the academic thesis, Essays on Technology and Society, the Impacts of Algorithms and Online Media on Labor Market Outcomes and Political Dynamics. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you, dear Prorector, dear Corona members, dear colleagues. Thank you for giving me the time to present a summary of my thesis. I will start sharing my screen now. So start with a brief introduction in the topic, Essays on Technology and Society. Well, this dissertation is about the influence of new technologies on human decision-making and attitudes. And we know that new technologies and algorithms are pervasive. Over the last decades, they have transformed almost every aspect of social life and human experience. And this is because algorithms, they are being deployed to assist decision-making in a wide variety of areas. For example, medical analysis, geo-release decisions, using political information. And while this has brought a lot of attention, a lot of discussions, not only on the efficiency that it's bringing, but also on the potential risks and side effects. And this dissertation focuses on the influence of new technologies on human decision-making and attitudes, mainly in two domains. So the first domain is a study on the influence of algorithms in the labor market. The increased use of algorithms is one of the most important developments in HR today. So just as an example, a survey conducted by LinkedIn with over 1,000 managers found that 70% of them believe that AI will have a significant impact on recruiting. And while understanding the effects of algorithm recommendations that are now part of the hiring process is of particular relevance for economists and policymakers, especially if we consider the consequential nature of hiring decisions and their long-term implications. In the labor market, algorithms are especially used for screening candidates, but the final decision is usually taken by a human. So this part of the dissertation focuses on the human aspects of new technologies, and it does so by exploring three research questions. So are human and algorithm recommendations perceived differently? Does this have an effect on hiring? And if so, does the effect depend on pre-existing attitudes and beliefs about algorithms? And we took advantage of the setup of a job fair to explore these questions in a pre-register experiment design. So we cooperated with an educational institute that promotes an annual job fair. And it is in this job fair, potential applicants would send their CVs to the institute, and the institute would match the CVs with the law firms. Then the firm would interview each applicant at the job fair. In the design, each firm was randomized to control and treatment conditions. So each firm received CV recommendation labeled as coming from human resource advisors and from an algorithm. And then we collected firms' judgments on the CVs at two different stages in the job fair. We also collected, so we asked potential employers to rate the qualification of each one of the candidates and also their interest in hiring each one of these candidates before the interviews. And we also collected the general preference for algorithm advice and their beliefs about algorithms in the labor market context. After the firms interviewed the candidates, we asked whether they had offered a position to each one of these candidates. Well, our results show no overall effect. while characteristics such as work experience or speaking English do affect the rating of the candidate qualification and the hiring interest, the source of this recommendation does not. So we can see here in the graph that there's no difference between qualification rating or hiring interest of candidates that are recommended by human or by algorithms. And we also do not see an overall difference on job offers, as this left graph is showing. Concerning the preference for human or algorithm advice, our results show that decision makers on average have a general preference of human advice across all domains of life. So for example, in contexts such as receiving advice for shopping or investing. So numbers lower than 2 in this graph here show that they represent a preference for human advice in our Likert scale. Concerning labor market specific beliefs, decision makers on average believe that algorithms are less prone to bias when selecting candidates, but also less trustworthy and worse at dealing at non-standard and exceptional profiles in terms of professional background. And we wanted to know whether these previous beliefs and preferences that decision makers had on algorithm and human advice would potentially have an effect on the hiring outcomes. So we analyzed the interaction between these beliefs and hiring outcomes. And we didn't find an interaction between the treatment and specific beliefs about how algorithms and humans are better or worse at selecting candidates. But we do see a significant interaction between the general preference and the qualification rating. And this is visible in this second graph here, where we can see that decision makers who prefer algorithm advice, which are represented by numbers 4 and 5 here, rank algorithm candidates higher than the HR ones, and vice versa. Decision makers who prefer human advice, represented by 1 and 2, rank human recommended advice higher. So moving on to the contribution of this part of the thesis, these findings of chapter 2 provide important implications for policies aimed at decision-making. In particular, those aiming at optimizing the algorithm-human relationship. So as organizations rely increasingly on algorithms to assist hiring decisions, it is crucial to understand and prevent potential unintended effects that are related to the use of algorithms. And this study showed that this general preference on algorithms and humans could affect an individual evaluation of candidates in a hiring process. And more than that, it shows that employers are not influenced by specific reservations on the capacity of an algorithm to select a candidate, but by a general feeling toward algorithms. And while considering that there are still low levels of knowledge regarding the use of algorithms in the labor market, promoting algorithm literacy to instruct decision makers on algorithms rationale and may well play a role in optimizing this algorithm-human relationship. And with that, I move to the second subject of this thesis, one of the most contentious topics in contemporary public debate, the impact of internet and social media on political attitudes. And while this is by all accounts a moment where political division is deeper in many countries, and there's also a feeling of hostility toward members of opposing political spectrums. And a recurrent explanation for this is new technologies. And there's a number of theories out there that support this view. According to a very popular theory, this would occur because technologies would create echo chambers where individuals would be exposed to information that would only reinforce their previous beliefs. And this would occur because of this filtering systems of online platforms, which would create a personalized experience for each user and expose them to content that they already support. So this pattern of communication will lead to the adoption of more extreme attitudes. And this narrative has gotten a lot of attention, but the literature around the topic is far from being unanimous. Most empirical efforts have been concentrated in the US, and there's limited evidence on other regions. So the second part of this dissertation seeks to provide other perspectives on the association between internet, social media usage, and political polarization. And we begin by exploring political polarization through a measure that captures the extent to which citizens feel more positively toward candidates representing their own ideological group and negatively toward opposing groups, a measure that has become very popular in the theory, and it's called effective polarization. So to create a measure of effective polarization in multi-party countries like Brazil, we rely on data from the Brazilian National Election Study. And to address the potential issue of endogeneity, we follow recent contributions in the field and adopt an instrumental variable approach that uses exogenous variations to identify internet impact on political behavior. So in this case, we used the availability of fiber optic backhauls, which is an infrastructure that allows access to broadband internet. And we find that although there is an association between internet, social media, and effective polarization, there's no empirical evidence of a causal effect. But we didn't stop there. In chapter 4, we go further in the analysis and use more fine-grained data available in the Netherlands, which allows us to use a more complex estimator that uses internal instrumental variables using a panel data. So we test this relationship using 4 different measures of political polarization based on questions on ideology and policy issues, and 3 different measures of social media use in a time frame between 2013 and 2020. Well, and finding lends support to the argument that using social media actually attenuates political polarization. We find that reading and viewing social media had a significant and negative effect on ideology and opinion polarization, and also spending more hours per week reading social media and using it with a greater frequency is also associated with lower ideological polarization. So moving to the contributions, the second part of this dissertation shows that the use of internet tools may have different impacts on political polarization according to the context. And the concerns that echo chamber and filter bubble theories are not verifiable in some contexts. So it reaffirms that the pattern of political polarization cannot be attributed only to internet and social media use. Well, this brings me to the conclusion of today's presentation. This dissertation contributes to a vast literature that analyzes changes brought by new technologies. And well, the first part of the dissertation represents a concrete finding in the domain of the labor market. It calls attention to the fact that the successful use of automated systems in decision-making will also depend on how individuals perceive and react to them. So potential interactions between human and non-human agents will ultimately affect decision-making assisted by algorithms. And this is now recognized by well-known scholars such as Kahneman and Susstein. Secondly, this thesis deepens the understanding of how and whether information filtered by automated systems influences political polarization. Given the popularity and influence of echo chamber and filter bubble theories, it is important to continue to question and to verify these theories empirically, given that this new pattern of communication is extremely complex and may vary according to the context. Well, to conclude, dear Prorector, dear Corona members and colleagues, science is never done alone, and I would like to thank my supervisors, Dr. Robin Cohen and Matthias Wilbrau, for their support. I would also like to thank your attention, and with this, I give the word back to the Prorector.
Thank you, Lorena, for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by the chair of the assessment committee, Professor Dr. Pierre Monen, who is Professor of Microeconometrics of Technical Change at UNU Merit.
Dear candidate, dear Lorena, It was a pleasure to read your thesis. I was wondering, what am I going to ask you? And I have some questions concerning the chapter on Brazil, where you try to tackle the endogeneity of social media use. And looking at table 3.2, where you first present the estimation without correcting for endogeneity, and you find a positive significant coefficient. And then you have two ways of correcting for endogeneity. Once you use what you call IV estimation, I would rather call it maximum likelihood, since you estimate the social media use as one equation, and then the effective polarization as the other equation. And there you find something non-significant and negative. So that seems to be an upward bias by using OLS. And in the second case, you have a two-stage least squares estimation. And there you find a much higher coefficient, not significant, but much higher. So I'm just wondering, since the two types of estimation point in different directions, which one is the one that you would expect? Do you expect to have an upward bias or a downward bias if you do not correct for endogeneity? And maybe as a related question, the fact that you do not find a significant coefficient, could that be that maybe you don't have enough observations? Could be one reason. The other one could be that the instrumental variable, so the infrastructure of having access to internet, is maybe not a strong instrumental variable. And to some extent, the fact that in table 3.3 for optical fiber, you find something which is only significant at the 10% level seems to point in that direction. And if I look at the correlation between the error terms of the two equations in the maximum likelihood estimation, it's also significant only at a 10% level. So that's my question. So do you expect a positive or a downward bias by using OLS?
Highly esteemed professor, thank you very much for the question and the compliments. Well, it is hard to say if I mean the direction of what I expect by looking at these different estimations. Of course, when I started this research, I was very much influenced by the echo chamber and filter bubble theory. So I was expecting a positive relationship. In chapter 4, I find a negative relationship of the relationship between social media usage and political polarization. But of course, in this chapter, I agree that there is data limitation. In fact, I only use data for a limited number of years, so only for 2018. And so indeed, I think the reason why we don't, one of the reasons why we don't see a causal effect could be related to the limited data that were available. And I also acknowledge that there might be other, mechanisms that could be playing in this that I was not able to assess. So in my expectation, looking at the theory, I would expect a positive relationship between social media usage and political polarization. But of course, to make sure and to affirm whether there is a upward bias or downward bias, I believe it would be interesting to look at further, mechanisms or further heterogeneities that could be playing in this regard. So, for instance, I know that Professor Bugarin, who is present here at the committee, has a very interesting article showing that, for instance, there could be differences regarding the heterogeneities of individuals' behavior in response to information that is shared online. So it could be that informed and uninformed voters would react differently to information shared on social media, and this could be, muting our overall effect, or even changing the effects when you see this heterogeneity. So it would be very interesting to try to find the availability to test this, the mechanisms further, and I would certainly be inclined to do this in further research.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by another member of the assessment committee, Professor Dr. Maurício Bugarin. He's professor of economics at the Department of Economics at the University of Brasilia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lorena, for inviting me, and Professor Pierre Moen. And it's an honor to be part of this committee. Let me follow up on the discussions that we just started and ask you a question about the construction or the building of the variable that measures internet and social media. There you use the dummy that assumes value 1 if the person uses internet, accesses internet blogs, social media, or Google search. However, I wonder whether these 3 components shouldn't be separated somehow. Think about people who use Google search in a more practical way, like us academics. I use Google search all the time, and I don't search that much for political reasons, for other reasons. And even if I search for political reasons, the framing that appears in Facebook, for example, where you are showed things that are related to your interests, your past interests, and that could have this polarization, that could explain this polarization mechanism. Google search is less like that. So my question is, have you tried the same variable but without this component, Google search? If so, what are the results? If not, do you think that could make the link clearer between social media and polarization? Because think about people who don't have social media but use the internet and use Google search. Those people may be less influenced by those algorithms that try to show you what you are interested in. And that seems to be the mechanism of polarization. I get into Facebook, and Facebook knows what I'm interested in, and then shows me what I'm interested in. And then there is this bias confirmation bias in psychology that says, oh, that's true. But if I don't use those, but use the internet, then I wouldn't be so polarized. So my question is whether that could play a role in the result that you found.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your question. It is actually a very interesting question, which I had already listened in a seminar when presenting this work. So indeed, when I started this research, as I said, I was very much influenced by the theories of echo chamber and filter bubble theories, and they do not necessarily make a distinction between internet, social media use on political polarization, these effects on political polarization. So that is why when designing this research, I did not look at these effects. However, I have tried to address this in chapter 4, where I only look at the effect of social media use on political polarization, because I agree. So after spending a while reading other types of literature, that the mechanisms are indeed different, and there could be a difference, and maybe the results could be clearer if I separate the effects of internet and social media. In the case of Brazil, I also had an issue of data restriction. So I did not have too much observations that I could count on. That's why I merged these responses together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
The opposition will be continued by the third member of the assessment committee, Dr. Micheline Goedhuis, who is a researcher at UNU Merit, Maastricht.
Okay, thank you. Dear candidates, Lorena, I would like to take this opportunity first to tell you that I have very much enjoyed reading your thesis. I find it very interesting. It addresses topics that are increasingly raising awareness, also concern about fairness, transparency, democratic dynamics, etc. And I find that your introductory chapter is very informative in explaining how the algorithms of social media and internet are actually determining the information that individuals receive, and that can lead to echo chambers. And so this first chapter was very interesting to read. So unlike many other introductory chapters, this was very interesting content, but it also raised high expectations for the rest of the thesis. And then I came to the second chapter, and I was actually expecting to find an analysis on whether and how human versus algorithmic recommendations could lead to different employment outcomes, or labor market outcomes more generally. But then when I was looking into the design, I saw that actually there was no use of an algorithm-based recommendation at all. So the recommendations, if I understood correctly, were done by the HR experts of the institution that you mentioned. So you're only actually attaching a label to the CVs, and that is then randomized. So I actually was wondering a bit, is this then really a contribution on the impact of algorithms on the labor market? Or is this actually more just a framing exercise where you assess attitudes, and is then the claim that you test whether algorithmic recommendations has an impact on labor market outcomes? Is that not a bit of a stretch? So that's a bit my question. Is that the case? Is it rather a framing exercise? And then very much linked to that, I was just wondering, would it not have been nice to also include in the design a randomized recommendation, human versus algorithmic, so that you could actually disentangle effects that are related to perception from real technological effects, in the sense that algorithmic recommendations would provide a better match. So that was what I was wondering. So I'd like to hear the constraints you had, or your view on this comment. Thank you.
Thank you, esteemed professor, for the compliments, and also for the very interesting question. Indeed, this was a comment that we received a lot when designing these experiments, and we presented this experiment in seminars, and we received a lot. We received a lot of comments regarding this specific component of the design of the experiment. So this experiment was designed to we did not take a look at the efficiency of algorithms. And I'm sorry I didn't bring this in my presentation here, but I believe this is reflected in the introduction of the chapter, where we state that we're not, the objective was not to look at the efficiency of algorithms per se, but rather how humans perceive algorithms and how they use these algorithms, and whether these perceptions have an effect on how they are going to use these algorithms. So that is why we don't actually use an algorithm to select the candidates, but we only use the labeling, because this was the only way that we could ensure that the candidates that were chosen were in fact similar to the candidates that were chosen by the algorithms, were similar to the candidates that were chosen by the HR humans. So we wanted to look at these human effects of these algorithms. We were not looking at the efficiency at all. And there are a vast literature that studies the efficiency of algorithms in the labor market, and they all come to different conclusions. Ours is, as I said, focused on this human aspects of algorithms. So I believe with that, I believe I partly addressed your question. Could you clarify if there's something else that you asked? Because I was taking notes, but I do not remember if you asked something else.
Yeah, no. So the second part of the question was then maybe if you could disentangle the effect of the efficiency from the purely perception aspect. That also could have been a novelty in such a research, because as you said, others look at the efficiency of the algorithms, but many things can be influenced also by perception. So but I can imagine there are constraints to a much more complex design that would try to address both aspects. So I'm fine with your answer. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Fabiana Vicente, who is an assistant professor at UNU Merit.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Lorena, congratulations on the achievement. I join the congratulation of and the word of appreciation of my colleagues. I appreciated both the research question and in particular the effective style of writing of the thesis. So it was a pleasure to go through all the chapter. In particular, chapter 2 raised my attention, and I think that in this chapter an interesting result relates to the impact of pre-existing attitude toward algorithm and humans judgment. And I would like to dig a bit more into those results. In particular, I see, if you look at figure 2.4, from these figures, I can see that those who express a preference versus algorithm, they also score, they provide a high score to all the candidates, regardless the source of information. So my question is, are those individuals, special individuals, so they express a preference toward the algorithm, But I was wondering if they have also other characteristics that differ from the others. So I'm interested in this aspect, and also how many they are. So I didn't find, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I missed this information. It would be interesting to know how many individuals you have in each category. So, because I think that these has affected also, those numbers have affected also your analysis, because in your analysis, you didn't distinguish, you didn't run the regression by category, but you implement some interaction. And I think that this choice was driven by the fact that you have few individuals by category. Yeah, I would like just to hear your reflection about the characteristics of those individuals who express a preference toward algorithms. Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the compliments, the kind words, and the question. Well, in our design, we did not look at the heterogeneity of the employers. So we did. I mean, as you said, you were. If I may rephrase your question, because you looked a bit in doubt. You're asking me regarding the heterogeneity, a potential heterogeneity of employers regarding the preference for algorithms. Is that correct?
Yeah, because from figure 2.4, it seems that those individuals with a preference toward algorithm, so those individuals in category 1, they express a very high rating for all the candidates, regardless the source of information, because the average score is 8 if the candidates was suggested by an algorithm, and almost 7 if the candidate was suggested by a human, while the average of the score, looking for instance at graph at figure 2.2 is 6, 6.5.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems that they are less stringent toward the candidates in general. So I would like to know if those individuals they are different from the others.
Yes. Okay. Well, so as I was saying, these individuals, they were the potential employers to the candidates. Although to gather the information, we did interviews with each one of the candidates. We did not took into consideration, we did not see the differences between these employers. So that's something that we did not measure in our design. So what we did was in the regressions, we added a fixed effects to try to, account for this, for the fact that some employers might be more strict to candidates than others. So we did add a fixed effects on the regressions to take this into account. However, we did not look at the heterogeneity of these employers, because this would end up in a very long questionnaire, which would not be feasible in our design. We had to come up with a very short questionnaire in order to be able to get the data. So we only were able to measure the heterogeneity regarding the candidates, so their age, gender, if they had experience or not. But all of these employers, they were law firms. So we didn't expect to see, much of a difference between these potential employers. And you were asking for the information, or how many were them? So there are 41 that were able to participate in this study. So for each one of these employers, they received an equal number of candidates that were recommended by a human advisor and by the algorithm.
And what is the proportion of individuals with a preference toward the algorithm, let's say the category 1? If you have, otherwise it's not an issue.
At this moment,
I mean, just a feeling is above 50%, is 10%, but otherwise.
So most of employers are
just to understand if they are an outlier, but again, it's not. It's just to better understand your result, but it's not.
But most of the employers, they showed a preference for human advice in relation to algorithms. But I do not have the exact number here. So I do have the mean, but I do not have the exact number, the proportion right now. I do have in other tables, but it's not provided in the article.
Yeah, thank you. No problem at all.
Thank you.
Lorena.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Jona Linde, who is an assistant professor of economics at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Professor. Dear candidates, thanks for this nice thesis. I read it with great pleasure. 3 interesting chapters with good pieces of research. Like the previous two opponents, my question is also on chapter 2, your field experiment. And I want to probe a little bit into the mechanisms for the results that you find. So you mentioned a number of reasons why people might prefer an algorithm over a human rater, or vice versa. Uniqueness, the algorithm might be less able to identify unique candidates, or they might be more precise, so make fewer errors. On the other hand, so there are a number of these reasons that you probe into. And I was considering that for the type of situation that you are exploring, some of these might be more or less relevant. So you have an algorithm that does, or supposedly does, matching of candidates to these law firms. So that to me feels different than, for example, an algorithm that would give a rating of candidates, give you some numerical standard of that, or would rank candidates in some certain way, for example. And sometimes I felt that maybe in the situation that you are exploring, who these candidates come from is in some sense less important than it might be if the algorithm made a ranking, but maybe that's only my perception. So I was wondering whether you could maybe give me your thoughts on that, and also how that might matter to the external validity of your results. To what kind of situations could you extrapolate based on this experiment, and which maybe not?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you very much for the compliment and for the question. If I may rephrase it just to clarify that I got it correctly. So you're saying that there could be potential different algorithms. So people might have different perceptions on algorithms that are just rating a candidate or just matching candidates, and whether this is something that we looked at in our design, or is something that we discussed, correct?
Yes, indeed, and especially related to the mechanisms why you might prefer an algorithm over a human or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. That's actually very, very interesting question and a very interesting comment. That's something that we have not discussed indeed in our design. But I agree with you that there could be a difference. I mean, if people believe that the algorithm is just rating the candidates, or if they are choosing the candidates, there could be differences on how they will perceive this algorithm. In our design, we try to be very objective when we were presenting the algorithm. So we were just saying that this algorithm picked this candidate for your firm. So that's the only information we gave about the algorithm. And so regarding the mechanisms, we wanted to see whether these previous perceptions on bias or potentially selecting an outlier or regarding trust could have an effect on the hiring outcomes. And what we saw actually is that none of this mechanism, none of these beliefs affected the hiring outcomes, but only this general preference for algorithms, which are not even related to the labor market. So these algorithms, for example, we stated in the question, they were related to advice in shopping or finance. And that was for us a surprising effect, because none of these beliefs about how specific the specific role of algorithms in the labor market and how they were good or worse at selecting a candidate had an influence, but just a general feeling of, how algorithms perform in their daily lives. So I think this gives us some insights on what your question addresses. So with that, I think I addressed at least partly your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Pierre Monen, who will ask a question on behalf of Professor Dr. René Beldebos, who is a professor of international corporate strategy at Maastricht University.
Yes, just a minute, I lost the... Here it is. So, Professor Beldebos, first of all, apologizes for not being here. There was a misunderstanding concerning the time of the defense, and he unfortunately has to teach right now. So he sent me his question. So first of all, let me read. Congratulations on the completion of your PhD dissertation. It consists of 3 well-written essays and well-designed empirical studies on the presence or absence of particular consequences of digital technologies in business and society. The specific topics, the use of algorithms in selection of candidates, and the role of internet and social media in political polarization, have raised substantial interest, making it a timely study. Given the pressure on academics to confirm theories and report significant findings, I particularly admire your scientific courage to produce 3 studies in which all conjectured relationships are shown not to exist. My question focuses on chapters 4 and 5, where you find that the use of social media increases political polarization. You do show that such polarization is strongly on the rise, in particular in Brazil. You suggest that other explanations may be at play, weakening social identities or a widening income disparity. I think there are opportunities to investigate these alternative channels in the context of your current research. For instance, by bringing in city or regional environments influencing the behavior of individuals. Could you share your thoughts on how you would introduce the test for these alternative hypotheses in your research? For instance, in the context of your analysis for the Netherlands. If necessary, what other feasible data and methods would be required for a proper test?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for the comments and the question. Well, I agree that these are indeed very interesting paths of research that could be followed in a future research. Income inequality and other aspects. I did not see. I mean, when I was designing the research, I do not see how I could potentially add these mechanisms into my research. But I would have to, I mean, this is something that I haven't thought through, so I would have to think it further, how to integrate these other mechanisms into my research. With the data that I had available for the Netherlands and Brazil, I do not think it would be possible. Maybe if I had used other approaches, other types of regressions, but indeed this was something that I haven't thought through, and I would need more time to think of what method I would be using in this case, and what types of measures I would be using to, for example, measure income inequality and weakening ideologies, for example. But I certainly appreciate the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Maurizio Bugarin, who is going to ask a second question to you. Please unmute Professor Bugarin.
Oh, sorry, I thought I had it muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, Lorena, I would like to ask your interpretation about two results that you found still in the Brazilian study. One regards this result about the northeastern region. You had a significant result. I would like to understand better these negative results. And the other one, it's about income brackets. It seems that the richer the person, the more polarized he is. How do you read those results?
Dear Professor, thank you very much for the question. Indeed, in chapter 3, we did find negative results, negative effects for the effect of internet and social media usage in the northeast region of Brazil, and a positive effect for, richer persons using social media are polarized. I'll start with the second one. Indeed, this is a result that was very surprising for me, because I was indeed expecting that education and income would lead to a negative effect of social media use in political polarization. But I do believe that we live in Brazil a very special context in terms of politics. So we have, so I believe that, you know, richer person are very much influenced by radicalism and these radical politicians in Brazil. Of course, I would have to use data and dig more into that to affirm this results, but this is my general feeling when I also seen studies on this, that rich persons are very much influenced by radicalist populist candidates. And this is at least what we see in very rich cities in Brazil. They're very much polarized and very much leading to support radicalist candidates. So this is one way that I read these results. And for the Northeast region, I would say the opposite. So since it is a region that is poorer, I would expect maybe these same forces are taking this, moving these effects, these negative effects on this Northeast region of Brazil. That would be my reaction at this moment to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, if the chair lady would allow me to make a very quick comment, I have another research that suggests that inequality in a country increases the stakes of the political competition. My result reflects it's interested in the cost of electoral campaigns. So I find that more unequal societies or parts of the country, regions, have more expensive political campaigns, and I study that for regions in Brazil and in Japan, and I find the same result there. But I think your result is associated with that because inequality has increased in Brazil. After a long period of decreasing, it increased around that time of your research. So higher inequality makes people more concerned about what is at stake, and that maybe make the richer more concerned with that, and therefore more polarized. So that might be one explanation. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Professor. This would be indeed a very interesting path for future research to test with data from Brazil.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Fabiana Visantin, Assistant Professor Junior Merit.
Hi, Lorena. I have a short question. Your experiment is conducted at a job fair targeting law firms, but my assumption is that the profiles that employers are looking for are entry level. Correct me if I'm wrong. If it is the case, would you expect different results in a context where employers are looking, for instance, for top managerial positions, so positions that require more expertise?
Thank you, Professor, for the question. That is a very interesting comment. I have to say I have never, I didn't think about this before, because when we were looking at the design of the experiment, that's what we had at our disposal. But indeed, I agree that the employers were targeting entry-level positions, because the job fair was taken at graduation and post-graduation levels. but I wonder if the result could be possibly different if they were targeting managerial positions. And it would be interesting to test these results in another job fair, in other contexts, to see whether there is a difference regarding this aspect. I'm trying to think of some literature. Well, at the top of my head, I cannot think of a literature that has looked at top management positions in the same area. So it would be very interesting to analyze this further.
Thank you. Because my intuition, but is just my intuition, is that for top managerial position, there can be less trust in an algorithm, but it's just my intuition.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think this is related to one of the mechanisms that we tested. For instance, so we tested whether employers, they believe that algorithms are less capable of dealing with exceptional cases in terms of professional capacity. So indeed, at least in the descriptive outcomes, we see that employers do actually they do prefer human advisors when they're looking at outliers, so specific backgrounds. So indeed, this provides at least an insight that this could be the case.
asked.
Lorena Giuberti Coutinho, the degree committee, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and of your defense. And I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return.
And there you are.
Thank you. Lorena Giuberti Coutinho, the degree committee here present online, has assessed the quality of your thesis and of your defense. And in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. And Professor Cohen is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Thank you. Before I give you the degree, Lorena, I have to ask you a question, and I'm a little embarrassed to do it because I know what the answer is, but form demands me to ask whether you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible. I don't know if a muted answer counts.
Yes, I promise.
Very well. In that case, by the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present online, I hereby confer upon you, Lorena Giuberti Coutinho, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, you will soon receive the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the supervisor, affixed with the official seal of the university as shown by the beadle. Lorena, Dr. Giuberti, congratulations. I like doing this because I get to be the first person to call you doctor. It's one of the happiest moments of this whole experience for me, and I'm sure Matthias feels the same way. But I have to start with an apology. And the apology is that I don't really have a laudatio. And the reason is for that is that I made a strategic error when I started thinking about it. And the error that I made stems from the fact that I realized that this would be the 20th laudatio that I've given at the University of Maastricht. And I thought, well, after 20 tries, maybe I should really finally try and do a Dutch one and model it on the things that I've seen some of my colleagues in SVE doing. Okay, I can do that, I thought. So how do they go? Well, particularly with some of my older colleagues, I'm sure not you, Mario. They kind of go like this. When you arrived, you didn't know anything. And during your time here, you made a lot of really stupid mistakes. But with Herculean efforts on the part of your supervisors, we managed to get you through. So good luck in your career. I think you'll need it. So that's the sort of model that I was working towards. So how do I start this? Well, I started by going back to look at your admissions files. And I didn't have the original files, but I had my notes, and I found a spreadsheet with my notes. And beside your name, my note said maybe. Then I found a more recent version of that spreadsheet, the one used in the admissions meeting, in fact, and I noticed that I had made some mistake in copying things down in that spreadsheet. And in the actual spreadsheet, it said yes. And I noticed that everyone said yes. All the members of the committee said, yes, we should admit this person. So my laudatio starts to fall apart as soon as I start working on it. So I thought, okay, we'll leave that aside. We'll go to the next thing, the coursework. There's prospect for the you don't know anything line in the coursework, because I did notice that you got a particularly bad grade from Xiao. Not the worst grade, that goes to one of your paranyms, but a bad grade. And I thought, aha, here's where I can start. But then I looked a little further and I noticed that the papers that you wrote, you finished your coursework with 2 papers. You got the top grade on those 2 papers. Okay, so that's no good. So what's next? The proposal. You wrote a thesis proposal. So I pulled it up yesterday and had a look at it. And well, it's kind of interesting because the first chapter was going to be, let me see, I have it in front of me. An experiment looking about whether matching job seekers and employers through algorithms is less favorable than through humans. Oh, that sounds right. The next one was going to be something about whether minorities are treated less favorably by algorithms, which didn't happen. And the third one was going to be a simulation model of feedbacks on the labor force structure, which also didn't happen. So there's kind of been a departure from what you planned to do. So okay, maybe I can make some headway here, I thought. But then I thought about the process, and Matthias and I working with it, and the process. Part of the reason for the departure was the process was completely upended by COVID, and your plan to go to Brazil and interact intensely with the job market fair and so on was completely destroyed by COVID. So I can't really blame you for that. And in fact, the opposite is true, because as I said a few minutes ago to the corona, the way this worked was COVID came along and that looked like it was completely destroyed. And so Matthias and you and I met several times about how are we going to recover from this. And then one day you walked in and you said, oh, I have a solution. And I'm going to Brazil anyway, and we're going to do the original plan more or less. Okay, so it sounds like it's not the case that I'm going to be able to talk about all the terrible mistakes you made that Matthias and I rescued you from, because you rescued us from having to figure out a plan B from that particular thing. So my plan for your Corona, or for your Laudatio, fell to pieces the more I worked on it. So I apologize for not having it. But if you know, if you've ever sat in any other Coronas, any other Laudatios that I've given, you know that I always ask the graduates' classmates if they have anything that I should say. And I did that just as a matter of course, I always do. And they did say quite a few things. Almost all of them good. You have good friends, Lorena. And that doesn't surprise me very much, knowing what I know about you. I'm not surprised that you're a good friend for people. But they talked about a couple of things. One of the things they talked about, and this is clear from the Corona story, how successfully you navigated all of the trials and tribulations, psychological, intellectual, logistical, of doing a PhD. And very often part of the role of the supervisor is to help a student get over these emotional problems that arise because things go wrong and something doesn't work right and so on. But frankly, I don't feel like I did very much of that. Maybe Matthias did, but I don't know, I don't think so. And this is something that your classmates commented a lot about, how successfully you surfed over the rapids that are inherent in any PhD. And how the extent to which you were focused and concentrated, and one actually said, confident enough to stand up for the things that you believe in and that you want. They also talked, there's a bit of stuff from your friends about non-academic life, and a lot of it surrounds music and how you dance and sing, in fact. Apparently you're a big star at the Maastricht karaoke bars. And also translate Portuguese music into, Spanish music into Portuguese. This is something that has come up a couple of times. So while I was reading through this, and I finally found the thing that I was looking for from the very beginning. And let me just read the text to you. Lastly, now that I recall, Laura has plenty of positive attributes, but cooking is not one of them. The only time she invited us over for dinner was when her parents were visiting Maastricht and they cooked for us. So I only discovered this too late to turn this into a 6-minute laudatio, but now I found the thing. You're a terrible cook, apparently. How sad. And I'm gonna wish luck, but not to you, but to your husband, because I guess he has to live with that. So good luck with that. But, and there's a but on the end of this quotation. And it's a long but she makes the most delicious caipirinhas, which have brought us a lot of joy in several parties. So Lorena, to be serious for a couple of minutes, which is all I can manage in these laudatios. It has been a real pleasure working with you, and I know I speak for Matthias when I say this also. It has been a real joy to supervise your thesis. There have been the usual problems, COVID being a big one of them, not having the right kind of data all the time being another one, data sets not doing what you thought they would do, results not turning out the way we were hoping. But it's really true what your friends have said. You have managed this very well, and it has taken a lot of the load off Matthias and me, the way you have been able to be flexible and accommodate these various setbacks in your research. You took our advice, you argued with us when you thought we were wrong, you came back and you wrote beautiful text. And you should be congratulated on your English, by the way. So I have to say, it has been a real pleasure from my point of view working with you. You've done good work, very careful work you should definitely be proud of. And I can only say all the best. Congratulations again, and Godspeed.
Dear Dr. Lorena Giuberti Coutinho, as it also says in the screen, of course, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I, of course, congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. And I also hereby declare this ceremony ended.